Today we will learn about the history of voting in the United States. The United States is a democracy and a republic. Democracy is a general term for a government by the people. A republic is a government in which the people elect their government officials to represent them. Notice the similarity between republic, representative, and represent. In a republic, representatives represent the people. So if you combine a democracy with a republic, you get a democratic republic, in which the people have the control by electing the government officials. And to elect these representatives, you must have the right to vote. The history of voting in the United States has been a long and difficult path. At the time our country was founded and our Constitution was written, very few people were given the right to vote. For nearly the first century of our country's existence, only white males over the age of 21 were allowed to vote. And in many states, only white landowning men over the age of 21 could vote. This means all minorities, all women, and all citizens under the age of 21 weren't allowed to vote. Remember, as a democratic republic, the main way for citizens to participate is by voting. So this means most of the population of our country wasn't actually being represented. To give you some perspective, white landowning males only made up about 6% of the population in 1789 when the Constitution went into effect. Today we will learn how these groups gained suffrage, in other words, the right to vote. The Civil War had ended, slavery had been abolished, and former slaves had been granted citizenship. The year was 1870 and the 15th Amendment was passed, prohibiting state and federal government from denying someone the right to vote based on the color of their skin. This meant African American men and men of other races who were 21 and older should have been allowed to vote. However, some states disagreed with the 15th Amendment and came up with new policies to prevent this from happening. Some states established poll taxes, in which voters were required to pay a fee before casting their vote. This prevented many former slaves from voting due to their lack of income. Many states also instituted literacy tests, in which voters were required to pass a reading and writing test before casting their vote. This successfully blocked many former slaves from voting due to the fact that they had received no formal education in reading and writing. It also prevented many immigrants from voting due to the fact that they couldn't read or write in English very well. To combat these policies, in 1964 the 24th Amendment was passed, abolishing poll taxes in national elections. And in 1965, the Supreme Court declared poll taxes unconstitutional in state and local elections, but the problems continued. Later the same year, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed. In addition to outlawing the use of literacy tests to prevent someone from voting, the act also required that ballots be printed in multiple languages in areas where English may not be the primary language. Nearly 100 years after the 15th Amendment formally gave minorities the right to vote, these policies finally helped make it possible for them to do so. Though they contributed to the founding of the country and helped pioneer the West, the fight for women to gain the right to vote also spanned the better part of a century. We generally call this time period the suffrage movement. Women involved in the suffrage movement were known as suffragists, and Susan B. Anthony was one of the most well-known suffragists. Born in 1820, Anthony spent most of her adult life fighting for women's suffrage. She traveled from state to state, giving speeches, collecting petitions, and organizing groups of suffragists. She addressed lawmakers in state capitals in an effort to get suffrage for women at the state level. She attended sessions of Congress in Washington, D.C. in hopes of gaining suffrage for women at the national level. However, many Americans didn't want women to have the right to vote. During her many speeches, she was often shouted at and interrupted, and even had eggs thrown at her. In 1872, Anthony was arrested in New York for voting illegally and was ordered to pay a $100 fine. She promised the judge she would never pay the fine, and she never did. Despite her decades-long fight, she died in 1906 at the age of 86 without seeing women gain the right to vote. However, a little over a decade after her death, times were changing in the United States. With men away fighting in World War I, women became vital to supporting the country at home. They worked jobs in industries traditionally held by men and gained much respect in the eyes of the country. After the end of the war, women finally gained the right to vote. In 1920, the 19th Amendment was added to the Constitution, giving all women the right to vote. In the politically charged era of the Vietnam War, the late 1960s and early 1970s saw America's youth become more involved in politics. The voting age remained at 21, and inspired by the fact that 18-year-olds could be drafted to fight in the war by politicians they didn't have the basic right to vote for, the 26th Amendment was passed, lowering the voting age to 18 for all state and national elections. The road to our current voting rights was a long one, paved by the efforts of Americans of different races, genders, and age groups. The efforts of these individuals secured the rights to suffrage Americans enjoy today.